Mom, dad, aunt, uncle, thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Spark Speaker Series, hosted by Incom Payments, live from our Go Studio headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We're pleased to have you join us for an inspiring series of speakers over the next 3 months who are all respected authorities in their fields to present unique emerging technology use cases that will continue to shape the future. We hope these events spark ideas, knowledge, and thoughts that will continue to challenge the status quo. I'm Kelly Barganier, your Master of Ceremonies for this exciting exploration into the universe of cutting-edge technology solutions. Now, before we get started, allow me to share some background on Incom Payments and Go Studio. Incom Payments is a global leader in innovative payments technology. Leveraging dynamic strategies and proven expertise, Incom Payments delivers enhanced end-to-end payment platforms and emerging financial solutions that help businesses grow across a wide range of industries, including retail, healthcare, tolling and transit, incentives, mobile payments, and financial services. With more than 25 years of experience, over 500,000 points of distribution, 417 global patents, and a presence in more than 30 countries, Incom Payments has a long history of innovation. So some of you may be thinking, what is Go Studio? Go Studio is Incom Payments' in-house innovation center, where the Go Studio team joins Incom Payments employees, outside clients, business partners, and students to challenge standard thinking and explore emerging technology solutions. The Go Studio team really pushes the boundaries, focusing on technology solutions that may be 3 to 5 years away from wider adoption. Things you may have heard of, such as blockchain, digital twin, AI, computer vision, and more. You know, all the really cool tech we're going to be focusing on during these events. So without further ado, let's get started. It's my privilege to introduce our guest of honor and keynote speaker for today. He's the founder of Intuit Factory, a blockchain business strategy consulting firm. He has designed and delivered seminars and workshops for Fortune 100 and Global 2000 clients. He delivered his first TEDx talk in March 2019 on Who Owns Your Digital Identity? Blockchain Unlocking the Identity Revolution. He then followed up with another TEDx talk in February of 2020, How Digital Assets Are Changing the Nature of Value, one of my favorites. As a public speaker, he helps audiences understand the potential impact and risks as we evolve into a blockchain-driven world. Now, I'm certain everyone has questions about blockchain, and our guest is ready to answer as many as possible at the end of his presentation. So be sure to post your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen now or at any point during the presentation. Now prepare yourself for an exciting and innovative adventure with the respected technology strategist and privacy advocate, Roop Singh, as he guides us through the world of blockchain, myths, legends, and reality. Welcome to the Go Studio room.
Thank you for having me.
Great
Kelly.
to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for that lovely introduction.
Absolutely. We have an eager audience today, very interested in discrediting all of the blockchain gossip at the virtual water cooler.
Tell me about it.
Yes, so without delay, I'm one of those excited. I'm going to give you the floor and look forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we will look at blockchain myths and shed some light on its realities in various dimensions. Then we will widen our lens and look at principles and frameworks, because companies, projects, coins, tokens, they come and they go, but principles remain. There's a wide spread of different type of people here. Believers and skeptics. I welcome them all. Skepticism is healthy. It allows us to question our own assumptions, broaden our own boundaries. And hopefully that's what we would do in this lecture today. So let's get a sense of where the room is and what you would like to focus on. So if you could get some audience poll questions here. And let's understand where you are in your understanding of blockchain as a technology, where you are in your understanding as blockchain as a strategy. And then of the 7 segments that we've been getting questions on, which ones would you like to focus on most today? So go ahead and answer these questions as they come up on your screen. How are the responses looking, Billy? Okay, most of the audience is beginner. Interesting. And how about your level of understanding of blockchain as a strategy, not merely as a technology? Interesting. So we have a spread there. About half the audience is beginner, about 30% is slightly more advanced. Okay. And then the more important one, a relevant one for this moment. Of these 7 areas that you have been sending us questions, and the Income team has collected all the paradoxical, most confusing issues, which ones do you want to focus on the most today? Just choose the one that you really want to talk about. And I'll make sure that I address that. I like these results. Quite predictable, I would say. Okay, so about 24-25% want to talk about blockchain versus databases, and then a lot of you, about 40%, want to talk about crypto versus blockchain. Not surprised at all. Okay, and then who controls what is the next third one. So we'll spend more time on these. Perfect. Let's get rolling then. Blockchain versus databases. So how many of you think or have heard or have come to me and said, what is the big deal? Blockchain is just a really complicated database. Why does everybody keep talking about this? Well, is it? My answer, absolutely no. Let's ground ourselves in one simple definition of blockchain so we can operate from there, and then we'll explore the differences between traditional databases and blockchain. To me, blockchain is a cryptographically secured, distributed ledger with a shared state. What does that mean? That means the nodes in the network have a shared set of data at the same time that it is published. Think about it this way. Let's say we all are in a room and we have a number of transactions between us. Let's say we're sending dollars to each other. I send 20 to Troy. Troy sends 20 to Michael. Michael sends 10 to Kelly. We have a set of transactions. Now the question is, we can keep our own transactions with us and say, this is my ledger, this is my version of the truth, or we can do it another way. We can publish these transactions at the same time as they're confirmed onto what I call a shared wall, metaphorically. Meaning, once the transaction is published on the wall, we all have access to it, and we know that this is the version of truth in that moment. There is no discrepancy. There is no reason to reconcile data back and forth amongst these parties. There is no reason to doubt the data because blockchain is immutable. Once you write data onto it, you cannot change or remove or alter it. And then we secure this metaphorical wall, so to say, using mathematics and cryptography. So essentially, to boil it down to very basic, blockchain is a distributed ledger plus encryption. So what do we mean by distributed ledger? The question is, remember these transactions that we just did? Where do we store them? Do we store them in our personal databases or in my company database, and then I have to send one to your company database and we have to reconcile? Or do we store it in a central server somewhere or a central cloud? And the question becomes, who owns that? When we say distributed, we say the mechanism of storage is distributed. These transactions are all stored in different nodes across the globe. And we'll get into a little bit more on how distributed or decentralized can we be, etc. The basic thing to remember here is the blockchain is nothing but distributed ledger and encryption. So then back to the original question, database versus blockchain. I don't think that's an accurate analogy or a comparison. What should we compare is the following, is the business processes that are enabled via centralized databases through application layer versus the business processes enabled via decentralized shared ledgers. What's the difference, you may ask? Here are a few. One, encryption. Blockchain comes with encryption by default, but most databases don't. Could we? Yeah, but we haven't done it as an industry. Then what else is the difference? In blockchain, you can include business logic at the transaction level. Only the data that is confirmed or authenticated is the one that actually gets into the chain. But in traditional databases, what we've found is there's dirty data everywhere, all the time. And then here's the biggest one for me. Because this business process enabled through centralized databases across, imagine, number of value chain partners. You know, imagine your package moving from one part of the world, say New York to China, or from China to Japan, or Japan to Africa. It goes to a number of different types of players and companies and partners. They all have their own systems. And every time a transaction is moved, or occasionally, maybe every day, every 30 minutes, every week, every night, depending on the use case, you have to keep reconciling that data. What is the time, effort, energy spent in reconciling that data? That is what you take away when you use a distributed ledger where information, data, transactions are available to all the parties in the network at the same time when they're published. It takes away all the manual. It forces to take away all the manual effort. It forces you to automate business processes. Then it forces you to ensure that everybody has the visibility to the same data. And then there is no need, or very minimal need, to reconcile. Yes, you can come back and audit the data because you now have a traceability chain. You now have provenance of where the data came from and how it moved. But you don't have to keep reconciling it over and over again. So it's better for the consumer. What that means is it's better for the consumer to get the data accurately at the same time. I'll let you take the slide and see some other distinctions. Moving on. We've heard this one. Blockchain is just a cloud database. So in a way, it's true. In a way, it's not. We went from, in the era of computation and storage, we went from an era of centralized storage to more of federated storage to more of what we now call cloud computing. And it took us perhaps about 20 years to even arrive there, where we can store data in the cloud, a public cloud or a private cloud. But then the question I ask you is, who owns that cloud? So here's a framework to understand distributed and decentralized networks. Let's look at the two axes. One is the axis of storage. Where is the data actually stored? Is it centralized in one place that possibly could be easily hacked? Or is it completely decentralized? Meaning that, let's say I have a book and I need to store that book. I break the book into 1 million pieces and then store those 1 million pieces around the globe on 1 million nodes. That would be highly decentralized storage. So we are somewhere in the middle, what we call distributed network. We are not completely decentralized, depending on which blockchain you're going to talk about, and we'll get into that in a second. And then look at the other axes. Who can join the so-called network? Do you need somebody's permission to join the network? And that would become permission-based blockchain. Do do you not need somebody's permission? That would be permissionless blockchain. So let's make these things more specific. When you say, is blockchain a cloud database, the question becomes, what is the design of blockchain you're looking at? So let's take your favorite example, most popular one, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a highly decentralized, or let's say distributed network in terms of storage, but it is also permissionless, meaning if you wanted to start a node for Bitcoin, you can download the software on your computer, adhere to all the rules, and join the network. You do not need any permission from any authority, any company, any government, any person. Wherein all you executives in large companies thinking, well, I may not want to be on a public chain like a Bitcoin or so many others, fair enough. You could design a blockchain that is more permission-based. You just take the 8 players in your value chain and you say, okay, this is the players that are allowed on here, and these are the only players that will have nodes where we will store our data, and these are the players that will run the consensus mechanism and prove which transaction is authentic, and hence allow us to operate this network. Permissionless, permission-based. Not all blockchains are same. So when you hear about it in the public, put this framework in front of you and think, one, how centralized versus distributed it is in terms of storage, and two, do you need somebody's permission? And from there on, you can address all the other design-related questions that come. Talking about use cases, here's a common one. It's only for finance solutions. Well, I have a few thoughts on that. So let's look at, even if it were only for finance solutions, which is not true, but even then, it's an exemplary superior technology. Bitcoin, to give credit where it's due, was the first system to create a peer-to-peer cash or digital cash transaction system without a third party. What that means to me, what is the innovation there? The innovation is finance or payment specific transactions in this case can happen peer-to-peer at the speed of software, finally for the first time. Blockchains are only for a place where there isn't trust. We'll look at a framework in a second that'll address that. Blockchain is the right solution for every use case. Not true. There are things I look at when I try to understand if this use case is a good use case for blockchain or not. Here's a framework. Without going into details for each and every one of these, just take a look at it. And what I say, if it solves for most of these challenges, most of these issues, then perhaps blockchain makes sense for this solution. I'm not one of those that says blockchain will have spiritual powers and it could be used for anything. It does some things really well and should be used for those things. What are those things? You have to identify those use cases. Authenticity, decentralization, disintermediation, proof of ownership, proof of authorship, automation, eventually transparency and trust. So to me, blockchain is a mechanism for creating trust more efficiently. We do create trust today. That's what a lot of you would say. We run commerce and trade and business for thousands and millions of dollars. How does that happen? We are creating some level of trust, but the question I have for you is, what is the cost of producing that trust? The manual cost of people, and the cost of systems, and the cost of reconciling and auditing that trust over and over again. This is just a simply more efficient, superior mechanism to create trust. Here's another one. It's free. Anybody could use it. Well, there's nothing free in this world. So, looking at this framework again, you remember when we talked about being decentralized? So now you must wonder, where are these nodes? Somebody on this planet is putting up these nodes. It's computer infrastructure, right? Somebody has to allow for that to happen. Where is that coming from? So that essentially is where the cost is. Yes, the cost is distributed, meaning it is spread amongst multiple entities, either individuals or entities. It is not borne by one party, but it's not free. And in a public blockchain network, like an Ethereum, like a Stellar, like a EOS, there are millions of entities that are, I would say, donating or contributing this infrastructure. And that's where we can then have this chain. So we have gone from a paradigm of one party or one entity or a few entities controlling an infrastructure and providing a service on top, wherein now this is a service that these network providers, if you will, or let's call them infrastructure providers, individual entities that put up the node, provide, and then we pay them in a public blockchain network via gas or fees to move each one of our transactions. And what does that mean for us in bigger economic principles? It means that we have changed the paradigm. It means the paradigm is not anymore one party contributing all the infrastructure. And it has its own challenges, of course. So let's get into your most demanded topic, blockchain versus crypto. How many of you think blockchain and Bitcoin are the same thing? Well, I have news for you. They're not. Blockchain is the underlying technology for a category of use cases called cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, choose the name you like, but they're not the same thing. And to really appreciate blockchain, I would say crypto, or the number of cryptocurrencies that you see around the world, over 5,000 now, they are just one set of, in fact, in some cases, in most cases, in my opinion, are simplistic use cases of blockchain. Blockchain has a number of different use cases, and we'll look at all those categories in a minute. But when you start looking at media, the noise you get is Bitcoin, 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 or Ethereum, or one of these. So let's start separating the underlying technology. And also, let's be clear on one thing. Bitcoin's implementation of blockchain is a specific implementation, and we'll get into more on what that is in a minute. But every blockchain, or rather every cryptocurrency, has a different interpretation and implementation of blockchain architecture. You cannot conflate the two. An Ethereum architecture does not look the same as an EOS or a Stellar or a Bitcoin architecture. Be careful in comparing the two. As I said, blockchain is not only for crypto. So what is it for? Let's look at these categories of use cases, and I'll let you take a good look at it. From chain of asset custody. Any asset, be it a physical asset or be it a already digital asset. So think about assets. Think about the house you live in. Think about your car. Think about all the data you produce online. Think about the medicines and vaccines we are moving now in the pandemic. All these assets, think about a package that goes from one part of the world to the other, can be tracked easily and better using blockchain. And there are a number of asset tracking use cases. Then let's talk about digital assets, one of my favorite topics. I believe everything that is physical and everything that already is virtual on this planet will eventually become a tokenized, cryptographically secured digital asset on a blockchain network. What does that mean? That means widen your lens. From your car, your house, to your fridge, to your own digital identity, to your DNA, to your own hologram, will eventually be a digital token that will be traded on a peer-to-peer network. The possibilities are endless. Keep going. And then we will have these exchanges and marketplaces to exchange this asset. We'll get into that more in a second. If you get into just currency, There's a lot of talk these days on central bank digital currency, central banks of countries or treasuries of countries issuing currency, which are cryptographically secured on a new set of rails. So we're standing here at a payments company. Think about the implications of that. Today we do payments, yes, in what we used to call fiat currency, or some of you may say, well, dollar's been digital for years. True. What are the rails? The rails are what is changing. When you have a superior technology that would enable currency where you can program the currency, and a new set of rails will come. So this movement is not just about new technology, in fact. This movement is also about new players getting into the game. Let's not forget that. We cannot remove that lens. And there are a lot more players getting into the game that want to set up infrastructure in payments that are not the same players as the previous 50 years or so of companies and players that we've seen. There's going to be a lot of variations of that. Stable coins, CDBCs, cryptocurrencies, all of the above. And then one of the areas that I like to focus on in identity. Every human and every device does have an identity. The question is, how is it stored? How is it shared? And can we do it in a way that we maintain privacy and give rights to users? And blockchain will allow us, or already is allowing us, to create systems to do that. Now let's get into some more media speculation type items. And you've heard this about crypto. Well, Bitcoin uses too much energy. Actually, what you've heard is blockchain uses too much energy and has a large footprint. Not true. Bitcoin uses too much energy. In your way of thinking, and I'll define where that trade-off is in a second, but the question to remember is, blockchain is an underlying technology. When you say uses too much energy, the question is who, which implementation of it? You have to be specific. And then similar question on blockchain is too slow. Nope. Bitcoin is too slow from where you're standing. We'll address that too in a second. But you have to be specific. There is nothing called blockchain is too slow. Which blockchain is the question? Now, when you're designing blockchains, these are the three factors you have to deal with. Decentralization, we talked about before. Throughput, how many transactions per second can we validate and approve and publish? And how secure is the chain? Now, in this trilemma, you can only optimize or maximize two factors out of the three. Bitcoin being the first one to put this use case for blockchain and in payments together, maximized two, security and decentralization. It is the most secure chain today because of the choice it made in its architecture, the block size, the signatures, the consensus mechanism, etc. And it does give it a lower throughput than a lot of other chains. Agreed. But if you ask the Bitcoin maximalist and evangelist, they would say that is exactly what we wanted. It is by design. This is not a flaw. This is what we really want. And they are still designing on that network because that is exactly the design specifications they like. And when you start talking about speed and throughput, my question to you is, why are you even asking that question? The question should come from what's your use case? A lot of times people ask that question just to have this race of a contest, which is the fastest blockchain. Okay, cool, but for what? Are you designing a high frequency financial trading system? Or are you designing an identity system that confirms maybe, I don't know, 1,000 transactions in 5 hours? The requirements for those two are very different. So do you require a really fast blockchain for your use case? I don't know. That's a question for you to answer. But don't conflate and just go after this is the fastest one. In fact, when you're designing a blockchain-based solution, you should look at the combination of these three factors and look at platforms that already allow for frameworks and SDKs and libraries to design and implement your use case easier. There's lots of them. Some are better for identity solutions, some are better for media solutions, some are better for trade finance solutions, some are better for healthcare record solutions. You choose. Don't conflate. Another one of those. We hear this almost every other day. Blockchain is unstable because Bitcoin is volatile. Let's talk about this. So I posted in one of the groups I'm part of that, hey, I'm doing this lecture, bring your most interesting, toughest questions. And one question I got was, hey, when is the crypto bubble going to burst? Great. This is a question I get every second day. And here's my answer. I don't dabble or theorize in an emotionally speculative market. The value of cryptos is a wonderful field if you want to get into it. That is not what we're talking about. It's not a relevant question. The prices of these speculative instruments go up and down based on the emotions of the market, and there'll be a bubble cycle, and then there'll be a bust cycle, and then there'll be a bubble cycle far beyond when I'm gone, or the earth is still here. Does not stop. Not relevant. What's relevant is, let's look at the underlying technology and use case it is enabling. So, is blockchain unstable? Again, which blockchain? What is the design? Look at the details of that, and not just design and its throughput and its decentralization at a testing or a theoretical level. Look at how it's implemented in a real world use case. And when you find that, that's when you'll find the notion of, is it stable or unstable? Does that make sense? Again, similar. So you can go look online, just type this question, what is the fastest transaction or transacting blockchain? Here's one thought I would leave you with for that. For those people that say that blockchain doesn't have capacity, is that a myth or reality? It's a myth. It's absolutely wrong. Here's why. There are plenty of blockchains today. Look at Stellar, look at EOS. I could name 5 more that have access capacity that is not being used today. Meaning you could run millions more transactions per second on those networks. They are undercapitalized, underutilized. So this question of blockchain is fastest and it has capacity or not, which blockchain is your choice, and how much capacity do you need, and how is the network performing today? It goes back to decentralization, throughput, and security. How secure it is. Balance all of them. Let's get into digital assets. NFTs, you've heard this plenty of times. What the heck is an NFT anyhow? Sounds like a scam, right? What is its utility? What's the damn point anyways? Who would spend money on it? It's not art. Here's a conundrum I asked in my last TEDx talk. Are we now attributing value to things that have no inherent value? Absolutely none. Or, because of today's technology, we can identify what we truly find valuable. Think about it. What are non-fungible tokens? These are cryptographically secured, unique tokens that exist on the blockchain and cannot be replicated. They are essentially assets that are not similar to another asset, meaning if you take $1, if I have a $1 bill and you have a $1 bill, I could exchange that $1 bill and get a $1 bill from you. The serial number may differ, but the value of the dollar bill is exactly the same. We call that fungible. But in a case of NFT, they're not fungible. One is not the same as the other. So think about art or any unique music, video. One is not the same as the other. And we have now just tokenized it. What that means is we put it on a blockchain, and essentially what an NFT is an address on, think of it as a public registry called the blockchain, where you can see this is the asset, there is a mechanism of storing it and identifying who owns the asset, and then there is a marketplace where you can trade this asset back and forth. And those are the only 3 things we need to turn, what I said before, everything on this planet into a tokenized asset, and it is going to happen. So these are the categories, if you will, of non-fungible tokens. Take a look at them. Art, collectibles. And then when you say, well, who's going to pay for it? Let's talk about baseball cards. You own them? Why? Let's talk about your favorite comic from your childhood. If I gave you a collectible for that, would you own it? Why? NBA Top Shots created NFTs for video highlights for games, for sports, for basketball. Millions of dollars spent on it. Who owns it? Why? The value lies in the eye of the beholder. Now, let's talk about the flip side. So this year has been amazing for NFTs and digital assets in general. All these folks like myself who've been evangelizing, talking about these things for years, have been waiting for this year. So don't tell me it can't be done. But we are also at the height of inflated peak expectations. And to me, that's not a bad thing. That's what you folks commonly would call it as a bubble. To me, that's not a bad thing. We have to go through that cycle to come out the other side, don't we? All technologies go through that. Nothing new about it. Will all NFTs survive? Absolutely no. Will there be ones that actually will be the lasting store of value and will disintermediate a lot of assets in their supply chain, like art? Yes. NFTs also allow for different parties to come in as part of the transaction of the sale of the NFT. The artist can now get its due share. So, to me, just like your favorite music, your most played video games, most popular movies, NFTs are a cultural phenomenon enabled via technology, and they're at the tipping point of social and investor acceptance. Almost. Let's get to blockchain versus enterprise. Does blockchain need enterprise, or does enterprise need blockchain? I'll let you answer that. Typical questions. Oh, it's too early. Okay. Here's an exercise, an assignment I give in one of my programs. Go to 3 sources of patents in the US and internationally, and just search for patents in blockchain and crypto and distributed ledgers in the use cases that you want, and see what comes back. People who do that come back and say, oh my God, I had no idea there are so many patents. Yes, a lot of people and companies have been developing, testing, and creating patents in this space for a long time. So if you want to create a sustainable competitive advantage based on intellectual property, are you too early? Are you too late? Here's the typical response, the typical outcome that we find. Of the 5 use cases that we whittle down to in our workshops, about 4 of them, folks will say, it's actually too late. Everybody's got patents on it already. What am I going to do? Maybe there's one I can sneak in. So, is it too early? Here's the flip side. Are there blockchain-based products or services that are highly adopted by a consumer populace? No. There is still scope for that. There is still need for that. We're still on a trajectory for that. So we still have an opportunity there. Is it unproven? Same point. Unproven for what? In a testing environment, for which use case? Or unproven for which type of implementation? Are there only use cases that a company would need in an internal only blockchain? So I would like to share this framework with you and ask you, what can blockchain do for you? Take a look. There are tactical use cases and there are strategic use cases. And particularly if you're in the C-suite, look at the strategic side. Are you creating new markets? Are you enabling a deeper engagement with your consumer? Are you moving towards disruption or creating disruptions, or are you merely surviving disruptions? Because those are the only 2 choices. Now you can implement a internal only tactical use case, nothing wrong with that, using blockchain within your own department, or you can go across your entire business model, your entire value chain, and look at blockchain as an enabling layer for you to create new business models, to create new assets, to create new markets. That's how I would look at those answers. Here are some latest headlines to show you how some folks in your industries are actually doing that. Here's a dimension that we haven't talked about much, and we may not have time today, is the geopolitical dimension. So I mentor a lot of startups in different accelerators around the world, and what I can tell you from personal experience is most of the innovation that's coming in this space is not just from the United States. In fact, enterprises are not the leaders in quote unquote innovation in this space, the startups are. And a lot of those startups are not here in the United States, they're in Asia. And geopolitically, especially when you talk about CDBCs and China having already launched is CDBC crypto yuan, that is a move that US, Russia, and most countries have to respond. And that's a geopolitical game that's already afoot. Let's quickly go through a few other topics that came up. Transactions are not anonymous. My info is not private. Here's another framework. This one is slightly different. One axis is storage. The other axis is who can read and write. Is it a closed and a private type network, or is it an open and transparent type network? So again, folks confuse this with Bitcoin implementation. In a Bitcoin implementation, yes, we can read that there is a transaction from this particular wallet to this other particular wallet. But do we know the identity of the transactor? It's pseudo-anonymous, and that is how it's designed. There are fully anonymous blockchain-based networks like Zcash. And then when you design your own, you can choose which one you want. If you are in a private permission-based network, you can choose that, hey, these are the 8 participants that can read and write to the network. Or even within that, you can say, these are the 4 that read, the other 4 are actually not able to, they can read, but they cannot write. You choose the level of anonymity of who the transactor is, and how much of the transaction can they read. I'll go a step further. In your design, you actually define who can join, right? Permission versus private. And you define what is the critical data that you're willing to store on a blockchain and let people even read. That's a choice. So there's no one size fits all. Now let's get to our last segment before we close. Who owns what? Crypto is just tech for anarchists. Criminals are using crypto. No one owns, manages this as a singular entity. Here's a way to look at the entire space. This space is not just innovation in technology, which is what most of us focus on. This is a new set of values. Yes, it started with a certain set of values that you may or may not agree with. That's fine. Technology inherently has a value system that it's deployed against. It is also innovation in new type of governance. Yes, no singular entity owns or runs public blockchain networks, but that is what we want. That is what the people who started these community-based projects wanted. It is by design that they want a community-based governance. And when you compare one blockchain, public blockchain type network to another, you must compare the different types of governance. That is what gives them their nature, so to say. And it also has a different economic or incentive model. Every public blockchain network may have a different economic or incentive model, which you must compare. Cannot conflate the two. And then beyond that, you must look at network effects. Who is using, how many people are using, how many nodes there are, how many developers are deploying on these platforms, and how many people are using them, and that inherently creates a network effect. There could be a really superior blockchain network with most efficient technology, fastest, most secure, high decentralization, not possible, but let's say there is. But if not many people are using it, there are not many nodes or network or developers deploying applications of it, it loses on the network effect. Will it be the most adopted one? Superior technologies does not necessarily mean that they will be the most adopted ones. And to answer the question on criminals are using it, well, if you have a challenge, there will be an answer. MasterCard just bought this company called CyberTrace to essentially do AML on a lot of these crypto transactions. And there'll be a lot more of these companies that'll enable us to safely use payments on crypto. Getting to one of the last points. Unregulated or questionable regulations. Well, two questions. For who and for what? There is no regulation needed to deploy a distributed ledger. You are probably thinking of crypto, and you're probably thinking of securities. Let's address that. In the year 1865 in England, there was a law called the Red Flag Act, which said when an automobile passes on a street, a locomotive in fact, that's the word, it has to have a minimum of 3 crew members, one of which should walk in front of the locomotive with a flag, a red flag, or a lantern telling other motorists that this automobile is proceeding. 1865. There's a dire need to create a regulatory framework for the 21st century. And if you look at latest developments with SEC and Coinbase, my hope is that both will work hand in hand. There is a role for SEC to be the protector of investor rights when it comes to securities. But the frameworks that have been defined thus far are for technologies of the previous century. We must define new frameworks, and I think there is a level of interaction and collaboration that happens between the industry and the regulators in different countries that allow us to create these new frameworks. And I think we will. We are on the right track. This is just how the sausage is made. So here's the last set of questions for you to take home, particularly if you're in the C-suite. The simple question for you is, what is your blockchain strategy? Is blockchain an opportunity, a threat, or a risk for you? And how? And if you can't answer that question convincingly to yourself and to your executive peers, I invite you to look at some intellectual hurdles. In my experience in teaching, a number of different types of professionals, C-suite executives to students, and interacting with faculty at universities, and also a lot of founders in this space, I find this sort of chasm between the startup world and their mindset and their way of looking at this space versus enterprise. Here are the 3 premises that you must believe in order to appreciate the transformative impact of blockchain. 1, creative destruction. Disruption is happening, and it is knocking on your doors. If you believe that status quo will remain, I have history to show you. Your technology cannot be your moat. Your previous century regulation cannot be your moat for too long. Your existing business processes and business relationships cannot be your moat for too long, because there is nothing called sustainable competitive advantage. 2, distributed ledgers is a superior technology for what? For transaction of data amongst multiple parties to give them access to authentic data at the same time. It's more efficient. 2, it is a superior technology for asset tokenization. For asset tokenization. What that means is that we will be transacting on the internet valuable assets and not just information, and blockchain allows us to create that world. Then last, crypto-based digital assets are a fundamentally new class of asset class, which some may not understand much, and that's okay. But you must agree that at a time in our history, there comes new set of asset classes. Here's a quick tidbit. Gold was not recognized as a new asset class to be traded legally in the United States till as late as the 70s. New asset classes enabled through technology do origin, and crypto-based digital assets are one of those. So the question for you is, are you going to be a spectator watching this game played on your screens? Or are you going to be a player on the field making the plays? With that, I point you to my upcoming book, Profits in Chaos, Blockchain Strategy to Sow and Survive Disruption. You can go on profitsinchaos.com to sign up for updates and discounts. And please continue this discussion and dialogue with me on LinkedIn. I would love to speak with you. Thank you for having me. Kelly?
Roop, such a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
You know, I was in a debate just this morning over morning coffee around blockchain, and after listening to you, I realized I should have bet tomorrow's coffee on that conversation. It was centralized around the latency and that it takes too long, and there's so many misconceptions around that, and it was just really great, valuable information you shared today.
I'm glad I could help.
Appreciate your time.
Sure.
So everyone, now's your opportunity to ask all of those burning questions. So enter them in the Q&A now. In the meantime, I have a few thoughts just to kick us off. So Roop, are there any network-specific conditions for using blockchain technology in any organization?
Yes, the way I would look at that is, let's start from a use case, right? So let's go back to one of these frameworks. Let's start from a use case and determine what are you trying to use blockchain for in the first place anyhow, right? That should determine what type of design do you need, and what type of network do you need, and what type of security do you need, what type of throughput do you need, et cetera, right? So these are the category. Typical discussions are, well, since we are in a financial services type company, we end up just focusing on those. And that's also a lot in the media. I would expand your lens and look at these categories of use cases, and then start your design of a blockchain-based platform based on what your use case is.
Makes sense, makes sense. So let's see, another question. What are the key questions to ask before selecting a blockchain platform?
Right. So these are some of them that we've already talked about. The other ones would be something we discussed in the presentation already. What is the level of decentralization? What is the level of throughput or transactions per second? What is the level of security? And then very importantly, and this is, these three are generic, but then you also have to look at what is the consensus mechanism, particularly in a public blockchain. In a private one, you're designing your own consensus mechanism, so
right.
what are you going to design? What encryption levels are you going to use? So when you look at this, and you sort of take another step back and say, let's say I'm an enterprise, I have found a use case. My first challenge is, do I build, or do I fork, or do I design my own? Right? You could be on a public side or private side, and once you determine these basic design factors, it's only then that you can move forward with actually visualizing your use case into a reality.
Sure, yeah. What level of encryption, right?
Yeah, that's another one.
Let's see, any other questions coming through?
Okay.
What technologies are primarily used in building a new blockchain framework?
As we discussed, distributed ledgers. Distributed computing has been around for a while. We discussed encryptions. Essentially, those are the two building blocks, so to say, of a blockchain network. And then obviously network design, which is part of distributed computing, would be the essential one I would look at. Does that help?
I think so. I think that does. But I believe we have an add-in to that question. I still don't understand why we need a digital currency.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have three thoughts. One, in the Western world, by and large, our financial systems work. And we are used to them. We have confidence in our institutions, although waning, if you look at media reports. But in terms of payments and financial services, we have robust infrastructure that's been around for a while. Although from my point of view, it's outdated. We can talk about that. But generally, there is confidence. That is not the state of affairs in a lot of the rest of the world. So think about it this way. It's like saying, well, I live in, let's say, New York or California somewhere, or Atlanta, one of these urban places, and I have access to clean drinking water all the time. Well, go to places in the world where there is not an access to clean drinking water, and then you really, truly appreciate the need. We cannot sit here and understand that it takes 2 hours for a village woman to walk to a small pond and draw water to cook food for her children. That is something we don't quite comprehend because we don't live in that environment. So that would be point number one. Point number two, the infrastructure that we have today is plagued with inefficiencies. And as I said, the inefficiency of those processes is something that we take for granted. So for the person who asked this question, you put a check today, a physical thing called a check, into even an ATM, and it takes 4 days for the check to clear. Why? Why cannot finance happen at the speed of software? It should take milliseconds. Why 4 days? And the answer is because that's the process a set of banks and institutions define. And we just said, okay, cool, that's what it is now. But we have to question that status quo. And the third point is we now have a superior technology that can answer those questions. And it already has. And there are people who have designed those systems are using those systems. Now, am I saying that these old infrastructure and the old way of transacting will be removed completely? No, I think we will live in an era where there will be both crypto-based payments and crypto-based rails and traditional infrastructure. SWIFT is an example. It was designed 40, I don't know, something years ago. It's just inefficient. How long does it take to do a trade finance type transaction, a few $1 million between two banks even? So they've done tests now where they could get the trade finance type, letter of credit type payment transaction down to under 24 hours, which used to take over 10 days. So it is this efficiency that drives us to need a new set of rails and a new set of payment mechanism, which is essentially what cryptocurrencies are. Now, the challenge you may have as an audience is you look at the speculative prices in the market. Just cut that noise out. These are two different worlds. These are perhaps assets that are being traded in an emotional speculative market. Okay, if you want, you can dabble in that and do it at your own risk. What we're talking about here is a different business process and infrastructure need. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so basically time to authenticate, cost to authenticate, picking and choosing what's right for you.
Right.
That makes sense. Well, Roop, that's all the time we have for today for questions, but this was a great session and very helpful.
I'm glad.
So everyone, I appreciate your time and interest today as we learned a lot about the truths and reality of blockchain. This is only the beginning, the first of 3 Spark by Go Studio Speaker Series events being hosted this year. So be sure to save the dates for our upcoming sessions as we dive into the emergent technology of digital twin and explore the fascinations of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And don't forget to follow Go Studio on social media, especially in LinkedIn. I hope everyone enjoyed the time today, and on behalf of Incom Payments and Go Studio, we thank you for your participation, and I'll leave you with this final thought. Innovation is the key to everything the future can be. So until next time, thank you.
Thanks for having me.